Hello, this is a DIY tutorial on how to make your own video games using Gamemaker. This is the Gamemaker Studio application. On the left, we have our resources, or the place where we will store everything in our game from sprites to music to code. On the top of Gamemaker is our shortcut menu, which will allow us to add resources or run the game. On the right is a huge empty space, which is our workspace, and where all the Gamemaker windows will be. And on the bottom here is our console, or compile messages. Starting with our resources, our sprites. You could either right-click to add a new sprite, or you could select the Pac-Man icon right here, which will allow you to add sprites. I'm going to add a sprite right now. You could load a sprite that you already pre-drawn, or you could draw your own sprite. I'm going to click Edit Sprite to draw my own. Another window will pop out. If you click the paper with the green plus icon, it'll create a new sprite or image. By default, all the sprites are 32 by 32 pixels. You can change the size anytime by hitting Transform, Resize Canvas, and change the size by pixels or percent size. I'm going to leave it as 32 pixels by 32 pixels. Double-click the newly created image to edit your sprite. You could scroll up to zoom in or scroll back to zoom out. On the left here is our tools. These are the tools that you will be using to draw your sprites. You have a selection of tools from pencils to erasers to paint buckets or even shapes and text. The pencil drawing tool allows you to draw by freehand, as you can see here. If you left click, you will draw your primary drawing color, while if you right click, you draw your secondary drawing color, as you can see. If you select a color in the color palette, if you left click it, your left color will change, while if you right click it, your right color will change. If you select different sizes, the size of your brush will also change too. The eraser allows you to erase colors that you've drawn, as you can see. The fill bucket allows you to fill any enclosed space that you have drawn. If you close up a space and you click the fill bucket and fill, it'll fill up only the space that you filled up. I'm going to quickly draw a sprite to use for the demonstration here. Click the green checkmark when you're finished drawing your sprite. You could add another image by again clicking on the paper with the green plus sign. If you wanted to see the sprite from before, you could cycle through each of your sprites that you draw by clicking the arrows next to the green check mark. Over here tells you which sprite you're looking at. Also, if you don't want to keep clicking the green icon, you could click the onion skin and increase it by 1 forwards, or you could see it from behind 1. The greater the number of this onion skin, the darker or the more you could see of the sprite before. I'm going to draw the same sprite, but maybe add it so it moves a little. Click the green checkmark when you finish. If you click Show Preview, you'll see your sprite being animated from the first image to the second image. You could also change the speed of the preview, but this will not change the speed of the image in-game. To change the speed of the image in-game, you will have to code it a bit, which I will show you later. You could also load sprites as I mentioned before, which I will be doing for this demonstration. You could also rename your sprites, but make sure to not include any spaces because when coding, spaces do not really work. So I'm going to rename the sprite Explorer down. Click OK when you finish. One more thing, you could change the origin of your sprite. This will allow the game to add objects from where the origin is. Now I'm going to create a new room. This is where the game will take place. Since there is no objects created yet, we'll just leave this for now. Now I'm going to create a new object. Once again, you can rename your object to whatever you like. Just make sure it's not the same name as any resources you've done already. I'm going to name this object O Explorer. This will be our player for the game. You could select a default sprite, which I will use as Explorer down. And I will now add a create event. This event will toggle whenever this object is created, so it will only execute once. I'm going to select from the control on the right ribbon and select code and drag it into the action. In Gamemaker, there is something called a variable. A variable is just any name you want, but a variable can only equal two things in Gamemaker. It could equal any number you want, or it could equal a string, which is anything inside two quotations. For now, I'm going to keep this variable called HP to 5. So our Explorer has 5 HP when he starts. Click the green check mark to get out of the code window. Now I'm going to select Add Event and Step and create a step event. A step event will execute every frame of your game. I'm now going to add an execute code. So, if we want our Explorer to move by pressing a keyboard, we need to get a keyboard input from the player. To do that, we have to do an if statement. An if statement will only execute everything in between two curly brackets or just the next line after, depending on the conditions. So, if I say if 1 equals 1, then anything in the second line will execute. Or if I say if 1 plus 1 equals 2, then anything in the line will execute. You could also add curly brackets, which anything after the if statement, if this if statement is true, then everything in the curly brackets will execute. So I'm going to say if keyboard check press, which means when a keyboard is checked and you pressed it, and depending on what you put, a code will execute. So I'm going to say if keyboard check press ord bracket single quotation a single quotation again, then I can make my Explorer move right. So if we want to make our Explorer move right, we select X equals X minus 5. Notice how X is red. That means you can't use a variable called X in your Gamemaker because X is the position of your Explorer. You could also do X minus equal 5 and it will still be the same as X equals X minus 5. So now we have our Explorer moving left every time we press the A button. So now we're going to add Explorer to our room. Select the objects, and then now you have your Explorer. Make sure your Explorer is selected. All you have to do is click it anywhere in the room and it will appear there. You could also create multiple versions of your Explorer. Now you can click the green play button to run your game. It seems like I have an error. Make sure the brackets on the left side, make sure the open brackets are equal to the same as the closed brackets, or you will get an error. You can click the green button to play your game. As you can see, the 5 explorers are created, and my sprite is already animated, so that means all the explorers will seem like they're walking forward. Now when I press A, all the explorers move 5 pixels to the left. And when I press A again, it moves 5 pixels to the left. But it only works when I press A, but if I press and hold it, they still stand still. We could fix that by editing our code. Let's go back to the step event. Now, if you want it so that when you press A the explorer will move left, all you have to do is remove the underscore pressed. Now, when we run the game, all the explorers should move left when I hold A. As you can see, all the explorers are moving left, but they still can't move up or down. So we could always add more lines of code. All you have to do is copy the same thing, but instead of A, we could change that to a different letter on the keyboard. We could change it to D for going right. We could change it for S for going down. For now, I'm going to add a new one called check press letter D. If we want it to move right, then all we have to do is write x plus equal 5. This 5 is the speed of which the sprite will move in pixels per frame. If we want our character to move up and down, we could once again change this D to a W. But now, we have to change this to Y because Y is up and down. To go up, Y has to become a negative, so we do Y minus equals 5. And we could do the same to going down. So we write S, and then Y plus equals 5. Now let's run the game and see what happens to the Explorer. So, right now the Explorer is able to move all 4 directions, and it can also move diagonal. But if we don't want the Explorer to move diagonal, we could easily change a couple code. Aside from the if statement, there is also the else if statement, which means if this is true, this will run, and this will not run. But if this is not true, then Gamemaker will check the second statement if it has an else statement. Else, if you press the D, then it'll do this button. So, we could say, if you press keyboard A, then it'll move left 5. Else, if you press keyboard D, it'll move 5 right. Else, it'll move 5 up. Else, if it'll move 5 down. Aside from the else if statement, there's also an else statement, which will automatically be run if none of these are true. For now, let's see what happens when we run this code. It seems like our Explorer can no longer move diagonal. Now, let's say you wanted to make the Explorer turn left when you press the left button, or turn right when you press the right button. Before you even do that in code, you have to add the sprites. So I'm going to insert a new sprite and name it Explorer up. And I'm going to load an Explorer sprite from the collection I have here. And I'm going to hit center because it needs to be the same origin as the Explorer down or something funny will happen. I'm going to go ahead and also add the Explorer left and Explorer right. Now we have our 4 explorers direction. Right now, when we press the keyboard, all the explorer does is change position. If we want to change its image, we have to type sprite underscore index equals, and you type in the left sprite, which is explorer left. Right now, my explorer left appears blue because I changed the option to show that all resources will be blue. You could change this option late in the file, preference, and in your scripts and codes. You could change the color of your scripts and codes. As you could see, if I could find sprites, sprite names will automatically be blue as I selected. Now, if we hit play, if I hit the A button, now the explorer turns left, but it doesn't turn back. So now we have to do sprite index equals for the rest of them. Now, if we click play, the explorer should change direction whenever we enter a keyboard input. It seems like our explorer now moves in 4 different directions. Now let's say we want an explorer to stop animating its image when it stops. So this is when we would use our else statement. Else, if you're not pressing any keys, you can make it stop. To make it stop, you could do image speed equals 0. But then, now, if you think about it, if you don't press any keys, image speed will be 0. Well, that means the image speed will always be 0 until we change it again. So we have to add it to our keyboard and put it back to 1. So now, if we don't press a key, our sprite will stay still, but when we press a key, it will be animating. As you can see now, the sprite is only animating when we press a key or while it's moving, but stops animating when we let go of a key. Let's add some enemies to our game. So first, you have to add a sprite, which would be your enemy. So now this is our enemy in our game. Now we need to create a new object for the enemy too. So we'll name this Oh Baddie. So we could click create, change the sprite first to the baddie. So now we could also go back to our room, delete all our extra characters that we don't need, and then we could also add our enemy. So when we run our game, now the enemy appears here. The background kind of blends in with the enemy, so we could always change that too. If you go to our room editor and change backgrounds, you could change the color of your background here. Let's change it to a green color. Now, right now our baddie does nothing, but if we wanted to deal 1 damage to Explorer when it touches it, we could do add event, step, add a script or code, and we could do place meeting. For example, you could do instance place. You always have to add the brackets. It would seem like these two almost have nothing, are identical to each other, but they still vary in different ways. Place meeting will have an X, Y, and an object that you want to check collision, but place meeting will return either a true or a false. Place meeting will return true if the XY touches the object, or false if it doesn't. While instant place will return an ID of the object that collides. ID is Every object, when it's created, has a unique ID which can be identified by. ID will always be a number. So let's just use place meeting to simplify things. And we'll write X for the baddie coordinates and Y. And then for the object, we will write oExplorer. So we also have to write an if statement. If place meeting is true, then we want to deal 1 damage to Explorer. So we'll do oExplorer dot HP, which refers to the Explorer's HP, minus minus, which will reduce it by 1. So whenever the skeleton touches the Explorer, once per frame, the Explorer will take 1 damage. So if we hit play, and our Explorer touches the baddie, nothing happens. It's because we hadn't written a line of code to make the Explorer disappear when it reduces. We hadn't written a line of code to make the Explorer disappear when its HP has been reduced to 0. So we could go to our step event and our action. We could create a new if statement and say if your HP is less than 1, you could do instance destroy. And you just have to add the 2 brackets to complete the statement. When you do instance destroy, the object will destroy itself and will be removed from the game. So when you click play, when an Explorer touches our baddie for 5 frames, he will die instantly. If we want our baddie to move towards our object, we could do move towards point. If you wait long enough, as you could see before, there will be a mini window that pops up, which allows you to see or scroll through different functions in Gamemaker. So we wanted to move towards the Explorer, so we do oExplorer dot X, which is the Explorer's X point, and its Y point oExplorer dot Y, and the speed which it's going to move at. Since we want our skeleton to move slower than Explorer, we could set it to 3. Now, as you can see, our baddie or enemy is now chasing us. But if we go to our room again and create more of our players and we hit run, let's see what happens. Now, for some reason, all of our explorers are instantly vanished. If we only want one of our explorers to vanish, we could change some lines of code. Instead of using place meeting, we could change the script to be something else. We could use the one that I mentioned earlier, which is instance place. As I said before, this returns an ID. An ID is a unique number, like I said before, given to any object which is created on the screen. So if we do instance place, or our new variable, if we create a new variable called instance, or inst, equals inst place, instance will be the ID of the object which it collides with. So if we could say if inst is not equal no one, so that means it has to be colliding with an explorer. Instead of oExplorer, we have to type in inst, which is the instance that's colliding with HP minus minus. So if we hit play, now only one explorer vanishes. If you saw before, we had O explorer minus minus, HP minus minus. O explorer refers to all object called O explorer in the room. That's Now, as you may have saw earlier, we got an error message when the baddie had killed all the explorers. So if we want to remove that error message, we could change this to a different line of code. We could do if instance number is, and you have to select which object, which would be O Explorer, is greater than 0. So if there's at least one explorer, it'll move towards explorer. There's also instance count, but instead of a yellow, which is a function, this is a red instead, which is just a number. Instant count is the total number of objects in your room, but we only need instance number, which is the number of explorers in a room. So when you hit play, and we let the skeletons kill all our explorers, now there's no more lines of error, except our skeleton will continue to be moving. This now concludes my tutorial on creating a simple game using Gamemaker.